Go ahead and get started. So thank you for coming today, and those that will be watching this recording later on. We thank you for coming for this really cool today topic, right? So we're very excited to have Sarah Cheshire here with us today. Sarah is a registered sanitarian with the state of Utah and also the pool program lead. So here are some other accolades that Sarah has. She's a CPO instructor, right? She's on our education committee, most recently being one of the driving forces behind the new CMAHC Aquatic Venue Public Health Inspector course, and also the upcoming plan review course that we'll begin working on in January 25. In addition to all of her other work, she's been influential in regulatory affairs across the spectrum of aquatics. And she was also on the 5th edition technical review committee as vice chair, where one of her jobs was wrangling all of our volunteers on our various technical support committees. In addition to all of that, she was also nominated and approved by the CMAHC board of directors to be one of our CMAHC ambassadors for the class of 2024. And on top of that, we've had a lot of conversations about cold plunges over the last really year plus. But on top of that, she is also probably, and based on what I'm hearing and interactions I've had, she is probably one of the global leads for developing public health regulation for cold plunges. So it's novel. We're definitely in new territory. And Sarah is certainly, I'm safe to say, a global leader in this, based on conversations we've had with partners from Australia, Canada, and elsewhere. So without a further ado, I want to turn it over to Sarah. One very quick note, at the end of the presentation, we'll take about 10-15 minutes to do Q&A. Please put that into the chat, and we can relay that there. Okay, so otherwise, enjoy the show. All yours, Sarah.
Thanks, Dewey. I appreciate your accolades. It's a little intimidating, but I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about cold plunge pools. It is kind of a new thing. And the first thing we're going to talk about when we talk about cold plunge pools is the history. So it didn't start out new, but having it in the public sector is where it starts out as being a new thing. So the practice of cold plunge, I think it's always good to go through the history and figure out where things are coming from, why people want to do this, and how we can make these things safe. Along with your conversation there, Dewey, I think it's important that we recognize that it can happen in our homes, but it's going into the public sector where we want to be a little bit concerned, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the presentation. So with no further ado, we'll jump in. We'll plunge in, I guess, to our cold plunge presentation. So the practice of cold plunge, also known as cold immersion therapy, ice bath, or contrast therapy, has been used for centuries to treat various physical and mental health conditions. In the Baltic cultures, it was considered a part of the daily hygiene and thought to boost energy, improve circulation, invigorate the mind and body. The Viking cold plungers thought that it made them closer to nature and connect with the deities. Mostly it was done in lakes, rivers, and oceans. It was considered a rite of passage for young men, demonstrating their courage to jump into this cold water. It was also used as a form of punishment for those that broke the law, which I think is interesting. In the Finnish culture, and that's where we see a lot of this, it became a way to purify themselves and cleanse their bodies. Health benefits include improved circulation, boosting the immune system, and reducing stress. And over time in the Finnish culture, it's become a celebration. There are festivals that celebrate this culture in this rich cold immersion history. Not just the European areas, but Japanese culture had the cold plunge bath. It was seen as a part of a ritual, which involved soaking in a hot bath to loosen up the muscles and cleanse the skin, and then followed by a quick dip in a cold plunge pool. This was thought to invigorate the body, help individuals withstand the harsh cold winters that were coming up. The samurai used this to test bravery and mental toughness and prepare themselves for battle. And now, current Japanese culture, the Shinto culture, developed these public baths as a place where people could relax and bond with each other. Ancient Egypt used cold baths. The bathhouses were used for cleaning, socializing, and relaxing. They would typically have a cold pool for immersion, and they would alternate between the hot and cold baths. It treated medical conditions such as headaches, muscle pain, and skin disorders. And also they immersed newborns in this cold water to purify and strengthen their immune systems. Ancient Greece utilized these cold water therapies for relaxation. Hippocrates in the 4th century documented the use of cold for medical purposes and analgesic benefits. He believed that cold water therapy would treat fevers, joint pain, and digestive problems, and that cold water would stimulate the body's healing process. So there's a lot of history there. If you go to, and this is a picture of my husband and I, this is Bath, England. And in Bath, ancient Romans developed these baths, these cultural bathhouses. They became popular during the Roman times and can be found throughout the Roman Empire, including England. They had both hot and cold baths. We went in December. You can see the steam coming off some of those. Roman baths incorporated frigid rooms known as the Frigidaria alongside with saunas and hot baths. The interesting thing here is a lot of them didn't have the ability to do the tests that we have now. So now we can know exactly what's in our water when we're doing these bathhouses. So they may not have known some of the risks, whether that be potassium or magnesium or arsenic or some of these other things that could have been in the water at that time. Between 1800 and 1935, the medical community began to use hydrotherapy, both cold and hot water for patients. So warm, soothing baths would help patients sleep, while the plunge bath or the cold bath between 45 and 70 degrees might shock a violent patient into settling down. And they thought that that was better treatment than being wrestled to the ground and restrained, to throw them in a cold plunge bath. Even at the best of times, hydrotherapy tended to be uncomfortable. Many doctors thought that cold water was superior to warm water. They believed treatments would be administered in the morning as the patients arose, and many medical practitioners believed that warm baths opened up the pores so that the person could catch cold more easily, so they like to plunge them in the cold bath. Plunge baths and other cold hydrotherapy were believed to be invigorating, and they did, however, think that it was absurd that somebody might enjoy jumping out of bed from their warm, comforting bed and plunging into the cold bath. A lot of these patients, though, had no say whichever one their doctor approved of. Early pioneers in sport, like boxing and rugby, began experimenting with ice baths as a means to promote muscle recovery and alleviate exercise pain. The anecdotal evidence was compelling, with these athletes reporting a reduced soreness and faster return to peak performance. One such pioneer was John Chambers, who was a trainer for England cricket team in the late 19th century. And he advocated for the use of ice bath after matches, crediting them with improving the team's stamina and resilience. And they kind of, these early adopters laid the groundwork for the integration of ice baths into athletic training regimes and processes. That's driven the popularity of ice baths, along with the rising trend of cold plunges in wellness. So it started in athletics, and a lot of athletics professional sports teams still using those. But in recent years, the cold water immersion has become increasingly popular as a wellness movement. Many spas and wellness centers are offering this cold plunge baths. And then who honestly doesn't want to look like Chris Hemsworth? I have a little clip from Limitless that talks about what Mr. Hemsworth did as far as cold plunging. Evidence supporting health benefits of cold therapy still remains scant. Experts caution that some people shocking the body with cold water could do more harm than good, even in less than frigid temperatures, so 50 to 60 degrees. The National Center for Cold Water Safety warns that sudden immersion in water under 60 degrees can kill a person in less than a minute. So there are risks to this. I'm going to turn on this little video and hopefully you can hear it okay as we watch Mr. Hemsworth do his plunge.
So, how's your Australian physiology?
It's in complete shock right now. My ears are about to snap off.
Think of it almost like a baptism. That's what we're doing, because you need to understand what's going on inside the body.
Oh, I know it's going to freeze in a second, yeah.
Yes. One of the first things that we're going to experience is this gas reflex. The body's basically just going, it's exactly it. You want to gasp perfectly normal. And to put it bluntly, consciousness and
goodbye, life. Yeah. Right.
So now what's happening? Now we've got over that gas reflex.
No,
They're still going?
I haven't got that.
Someone's about to put the hot tap on.
How is it? Oh, it's amazing. It's so warm in here.
What's the level of shrinkage? Can you feel that blood going away from the extremity?
Yeah, I can feel all sorts of pain.
How is it?
Oh, I feel like I'm dying.
I think you'd like that. Bring it out.
You actually probably are.
Let's get it out. Give me Kane one.
My God, is there a towel somewhere? That towel! The world's smallest towel!
It's okay, the warm wind.
Warm wind. Yeah, storm's coming in, guys. Woo! My fingers just don't exist right now.
They will.
Most awful thing. Like great moments in your career. Fingers, that's up one.
The longer you spend in water, the risk goes up exponentially. If you push yourself beyond the point at which you should be coming out, there is a real risk you could die.
And if there's one thing I really, really hate, it's the cold. My head's thumping, my body's screaming. This is crazy. What are you doing? My arms and legs feel like lead balloons. I'm completely off my balance. I just feel paralyzed.
Yeah. We've got gloves.
Chris, the cameras weren't rolling, but in one more take, mate, I'm never doing that again.
Not to lights.
Defrost me now.
See you in the room.
I'm fully wintered. You're fully wintered. Yes. Good job, mate. And the cold never bothered me anyway.
Uh-oh. Okay. You could see that the doctor in there said there is a risk of dying. You know how risky this is. And the other thing that I wanted you to notice in that video was it's open water. There hasn't been very many studies or very many experiments or things that explain what happens when you do it in a controlled environment. Most of it's open water swimming. You saw him even when he was plunging, he was moving his fingers, right? Trying to focus on something different. Dr. George Plutsky, the director of preventative cardiology at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, said the cold shock can be dangerous. Whether there are health benefits or not, it's not clear, and that has not been established. And that's from the American Heart Association. So it can be a little bit dangerous. Oh, I think it's going to go back to my video, so I have to do that a little bit different. There we go. So now we have this. Who doesn't want to look like Chris Hemsworth? It should be healthy. This is making us limitless. This is making us invincible. It's strengthening our immune system. It's been done for centuries in all of this history. And now we're having the transition from homeowner setups, doing it in your bathtub, or at your home into these commercial and medical applications. So we can't control what cold plunge practices people do in their own homes, but the public environmental health risk comes when these facilities begin to open for the public. And that's why we're here, to try to discuss that and learn what we can do better. There's a general perception that if a business is open to the public, it should be safe. That's where public health comes in. Important questions need to be considered, such as what are the risks? What is the likelihood of associated injury or illness? How do we manage or mitigate those risks while allowing the businesses to be innovative and expand on technologies? How do we prevent the uninformed public from doing something that could be harmful to themselves or others? And how do we balance all of this in this political and economical era that is rapidly moving away from business regulation? So the cold therapy industry has left an indelible mark on the economy, fueled by the perfect storm of health-seeking consumers, performance-driven athletes, and cutting-edge recovery methods. As this demand for ice bathtubs surges, these portable immersion devices and cold plunge water chillers, the market growth shows no sign of slowing. Health care providers and luxury spas are integrating ice baths into their offerings, and professional sports teams invest heavily in state-of-the-art cold therapy, offering full body immersion in these bone chilling chambers, and it's very devoted wellness seekers. With that background, let's talk about some of the risks for public health and whether or not they should be regulated. Because there is a chance that they shouldn't be regulated, and that's why we're having this presentation and this discussion. So the transition from homeowners setups to commercial applications. Here's some of the homeowner ones that you can get. How do you think they fare in a commercial setting? Like, how can you have just ice in there? How do you control that temperature? How do you know that that chiller unit is not going to just dissolve? We know that cold water is more aggressive. We know that chlorine effectiveness begins to decline at 65 degrees or lower. And we know if you have a salt generator for chlorine, they don't work below 60 degrees. So how are we going to keep these facilities safe for the public as they start coming in there? So what are some of the health and safety considerations? And if I was in person, I would have you all chime in and tell me what are some of the health and safety considerations. Instead, you just have to listen to me read some of the studies that I've read about this. But plunging the body into cold water triggers that sudden rapid increase in breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure known as the cold shock response. If you've ever jumped in a cold lake, you jump in and you go, oh, okay, now it's warm enough to actually breathe. That can cause a person to drown within seconds if they involuntarily gasp while their head is submerged. This cold shock also places stress on the heart and makes it work harder. Within minutes, the loss of heat begins to cause other problems. Blood rushes away from the extremities to the body's core to protect vital organs. And that leaves the arms and legs without good circulation, which can lead to loss of strength and loss of coordination. Again, most of the studies have been in open water swims. So then you can't swim and the risk of drowning becomes a lot higher. The rapid loss of heat can also lead to hypothermia, making it harder to think clearly or move well. Being immersed in that cold water triggers the hypothermia faster than being just out in the cold because water takes heat away from the body 25 times faster than air does. Some studies do suggest that people can adapt to this through routine ice bathing or winter swimming, and they can reduce those inflammation and other cardiovascular risks. But others have found evidence of higher levels of troponin in people who compete in winter swims, suggesting that prolonged cold water immersion could lead to heart muscle damage. So we don't know is part of the problem. Dr. Plutsky from the Boston Women's University said, I would caution against it for anyone with a cardiac history. People with heart conditions may also take medications such as beta blockers that lower the blood pressure and reduce those heart rates, which could make it even harder for the body to adapt to this sudden shock. The shock response can be lessened by acclimating the body over time. Said Lee Hill, who was an exercise science at McGill University in Quebec. He said that you have to prepare yourself for your body to get prepared. So for those not habituated in this cold plunge theory or cold plunge practice, he said, I would suggest starting slowly, spending time in cold water sources with temperatures that are higher, and then slowly drop that temperature as the weather gets colder, or if there's no place to swim outdoors, in your cold plunge tank. Getting your lungs exposed to that cold air, putting cold water on the back of your neck, priming your neurological system that cold shock is coming. He also said the most dangerous time is the first 10 seconds to a minute when people get their breath under control. Again, it's that, oh, okay, I can breathe now when you first jump into that cold water. Hill said you can survive for up to an hour moving around, but for those who are not accustomed to that cold water shock, it can be extremely risky. And it continues after you get out of the water. That risk for hypothermia continues after you get cold. After you're cold, your body's still trying to warm itself up. You should immediately get out of cold, wet clothes into warm ones, get near a space heater, drink a warm beverage. But you saw how Chris Hemsworth stuck his fingers in his drink, his warm beverage, and couldn't feel them because he didn't know if it was warm or hot, right? Hill also cautioned, never do a cold water swim on your own. He said that's a recipe for disaster. So some of the other risks, dangers of cold plunging, we've talked about hypothermia. Again, cold water cools your body 25 times faster than air. If you're in the cold water, if you're immersed in the cold water, you can have heart issues, which I think is really interesting because we don't think about the heart and cold, but when the body is cold and plunged into cold water, it instinctively triggers that fight or flight response. This primal reaction causes the heart rate and blood pressure to surge as the body prepares to respond to whatever it perceives as a threat, and that cold water is the threat. This natural defense can place strain on the cardiovascular system, so it can trigger arrhythmias, disrupting the heart's normal rhythm. It can lead to a heart attack. The stress induced by cold immersion may precipitate a heart attack, especially those with underlying conditions. And sometimes those people that are getting in our cold plunge pools don't know they have these underlying conditions. It can increase the risk of stroke because of that blood pressure, sudden cardiac death. In rare instances, the shock from cold water can lead to sudden cardiac death, a risk that even for individuals without prior heart issues. And then you have the after drop phenomenon. So even after you get out of the water, upon exiting that environment, the peripheral blood vessels dilate, and colder blood returns to the core, which can further lower that core body temperature. So there's risks, especially for people with cardiac conditions. But it also talks about following groups that may want to avoid ice baths entirely: elderly individuals, pregnant women, because they can't control that temperature of that little fetus, people with weakened immune systems, people on beta blockers for medication or blood thinners. Newcomers should really take it cautiously, and people with other health concerns. So pre-existing illnesses, let's talk a little bit about that. If you have a cold, like a respiratory condition, it may exacerbate or make those conditions worse. While cold exposure through ice baths and similar therapies have been reported to bring benefits, they can also make things worse. Based on the risks associated with cold exposure during illnesses, you should avoid cold exposure when you're sick. That's why your mom told you to bundle up when you go outside so you don't get sick, right? Those experiencing fever should use caution. It can suppress the immune response. The cold can suppress the immune response, cause shivering, which may increase the body's thermal set point and lead to further elevation of body temperature, so it can make your fever worse. People with active infections might shift the body's focus from fighting the infection to preserving heat instead of fighting that infection. So it's advisable for people that are vulnerable to consult with their healthcare provider before they get into the cold water. Cold shock, we've talked a little bit about. That's when you have a rapid but weak pulse, shallow breathing, dizziness, fainting, cold and clammy skin. You saw in the video where Mr. Hemsworth was, I feel dizzy, I feel lightheaded. And that's what the blood going away from the extremities back to the core. So it can be a little bit dangerous. Frostbite can also be a concern. The colder the water temperature, the risk of frostbite goes up. The duration of exposure, so extended periods in the cold water, heightens the risk of frostbite. The body's heat is finite, and prolonged exposure can deplete it to dangerous levels. The wind getting out, they talked about that warm wind that was not warm, right? The wind can make it worse, especially if you're wet. That wind bites to the core. If somebody suspects frostbite or frost nip, the first aid is to gently warm those affected areas in warm, not hot water, and not rub those areas, because that could create further tissue damage. So there's a lot of dangers with cold plunge, but there are also some operational considerations. What about biological contamination? What are the risks for children? Children can't control their body temperature. They have a lower body fat percentage typically. So there are risks for children. Plunge duration and temperature can be issues. So how long do you stay in the water? Beginners will be a lot less and a lot warmer temperature, a lot less time, a lot warmer temperature than more seasoned people. And water balance challenges. We mentioned that the water is a lot more aggressive, meaning the calcium is dissolved in the water. Your total dissolved solids are a lot higher. It's a lot harder to control that. So generally speaking, let's talk briefly about biological contamination. Generally, the cold water makes it so that the organic load is a lot lower. The bacteria is not going to grow. It reduces the disease-causing organisms in the water. Pseudomonas particularly grows at a lot slower in colder water or temperatures below 86 degrees. But I don't know that the cold water is going to be enough of a control. Pseudomonas can get quite nasty if you get a Pseudomonas infection. And the process of these ice baths that we're seeing pop up in wellness centers is you sit in a sauna or a warm bath, a hot tub, and then you get out and you jump right, so you sweat and all of that sweat and contamination, and then you jump right into this cold plunge. So the organic load is intense for these cold plunge tubs. There was a study in Australia, the Gold Coast Health, and they said in 2014, there were cases of Staphylococcus aureus that were identified in an English rugby team who shared ice baths, so germs that were sharing. Pseudomonas and Legionella species were also found in ice baths in hospital settings. So there can be biological contamination even though the water is cold. There's a strong correlation between chlorine levels and disinfectant and potentially infectious microorganisms depending on how you're cleaning and how you're sanitizing. So we need to figure out ways that we can regulate that cleaning and sanitation to reduce some of those risks, and plunge duration, and then how do we control for these biological factors. So how do we mitigate these risks? How do we make them so that it's safe and comfortable, but we don't prohibit them from operating? I think that's the trick, and that's where public health kind of walks that fine line. You don't want people to be complacent and jump right in when it could be a dangerous situation, but you don't want them to panic and not use these facilities, especially if there could be some good coming out of them. So how do we mitigate these risks? Let's talk a little bit about sanitation and disinfection. This is a cold plunge pool. So that previous slide that I had was a cold plunge pool that is open and operating in Utah. So how do we keep it sanitized and disinfected? Well, we do like a regular pool. We have ORP controllers on here. We have chlorine. This is acid. We have chlorine tablets. I don't know that they're in this particular picture, but they have filtration. We need to make sure that we're preventing that any biologicals that are possibly in there from growing or making somebody sick. So how do we do that? We sanitize and we disinfect. Now, chlorine is less effective at under 65 degrees. So that reaction for the chlorine to bond with those contaminants takes a lot longer. It's not been studied how long. We don't know how long it takes, but we do know it takes longer for that to happen. Also testing protocols. Your standard DPD test kits do not give adequate precision or accuracy in this environment. Orenda does a pool test kit, and there's a link to this on the slides, and I believe I can give those to Dewey and the CMAHC folks, and we can get those out to the people in this, so you can read the slides and link to these links. But water temperature actually affects our testing. Different test kit manufacturers say that different numbers. If water is below 60 degrees, the results are inaccurate. Lower water temperatures slow the reaction of the test kit, and in some cases prevent the desired reaction from happening at all. So every year we test chemistry values, and they say, well, it doesn't make sense. So they tested their pool side, and then they bring it into a testing company or a pool company to test it. And the testing is totally different because the temperature of the water has changed. So how do we warm up our testing, our pool sample or our cold plunge sample, to make sure that we're getting accurate results? So if the water is below 65, we need to warm it up. And most peer-reviewed water chemistry studies say to warm it up to 77 degrees. It also says that those test kits are usually accurate between 50 and 90 degrees. So if you have a hot tub, you also need to cool it down a little bit. 77 degrees is where the peer review water chemistry studies say the standard temperature should be to test and do these calculations. So how do we warm up a cold sample? Well, you can take it out and put it in your pocket. You can put it in the sun to warm it up. You can put it on a dashboard. You can bring it into the house if you have a cold plunge pool outside or somewhere where it's warm. It doesn't take much, but we need to warm those samples up. And I don't know that our cold plunge operators really know that the testing protocols, we need to warm that water up before you're getting an accurate test result. And then if you get an inaccurate test result and you start treating, you start sanitizing, disinfecting on that inaccurate result, then it exacerbates or makes that problem even worse. The next slide is about plunge duration and temperature. Andrew Huberman has done a lot of studies in this. This is a Stanford professor. He says you want to be uncomfortable but safe. The goal is to put your mind in a state of, whoa, I'm shocking my body, right? This cold plunge. The temperature that is ideal from this varies from person to person and from day to day. It may even vary in that same person depending on the time of day. So there's not a prescriptive number. And that makes it really difficult to put in a public situation because everybody is so different. Everybody has their own prescription for this. It depends on your cold tolerance and core metabolism. So in Utah, we have proposed that the manager shall post the temperature of each cold plunge so that it is readily visible, so that any bather is alerted and informed before using that cold plunge pool, so they can make an informed decision. It does take that public, whoever's coming into your cold plunge pool, that public cold plunge pool, they've got to make some choices and they have to be educated in those choices a little bit. So we say that you have to have that temperature posted. It will be different for a new beginner of cold plunging than it would be for somebody that's done this for a long time, just because they've acclimated their body to that cold. Plunge Junkies is a website that I got some information from, and they say to maintain the water temperature between 50 and 59 degrees. If you wish to experience colder temperatures, make sure to decrease the temperature gradually over multiple sessions. Use a thermometer to ensure that the water stays at the recommended temperature range. That goes into your equipment. I don't think you can just throw a bag of ice in there and maintain a consistent temperature. You need to have some sort of chiller unit or refrigeration unit so that you can maintain that consistent temperature while that water is circulating. It wouldn't be consistent if you were just throwing ice in every once in a while. You can't keep that ice in there consistent temperature. So Utah's proposed regulation says you should have a refrigeration system or other means to maintain a consistent temperature, such as a heat exchanger, chiller unit, or other type of mechanical unit. And again, we don't know what the public coming in, we don't have their medical background, we don't have their history, so we don't know what plunge duration and temperature they really should be using. Another thing to think about, another one of the risks is water balance. Balanced water is when calcium carbonate does not precipitate out of the water and stick to the plaster, plumbing, heating, and everything else. So it's not scale forming. At the same time, balanced water is not corrosive. It's not going to dissolve the plaster, mortar, or metal that it comes in contact with. Balanced water is neither scaling nor corrosive. When a pool has aggressive or corrosive water, the walls may be eroded. And I know they're making these tanks or these tubs out of stainless steel, which aids in the erosion. It aids in protecting from erosion, I guess is what I should say. But what about your chiller unit? What about the metal in that unit? The iron and the copper. We know the iron and copper erode out of our heater units in warmer water. We know that cold water is naturally more aggressive or more corrosive than warmer water. So what's happening to those chiller units? And I don't know that there have been any studies that have proven what happens to those chiller units. And I don't know that there are any that are NSF approved. So something to think about when we're approving these for public use. Sanitizing and disinfection happens a lot slower in cold water. And bather load. Most people are only getting in and out of this pool. They're only in it for 2 minutes, and then you have somebody else getting in, and then they go back to the hot, and then they come back to the cold for 2 minutes. So you could have an extremely high bather load and an intense organic load in there because they sweat. And they say they take a shower, but we know in the United States, most people don't take a shower before they get into this cold plunge. The chlorine is not going to work as well. It begins to decline at 65 degrees or below. And we know that salt generators don't work either well in cold water. They don't work under 60 degrees Fahrenheit. I've also talked to some operators regarding cold plunge pools, and they say it's really, really hard to maintain a temperature below 50 degrees. So just the equipment and the water balance, it makes it really hard to maintain that temperature below 50 degrees. The other thing to think about is supervision. Are signs enough to warn and help people understand the risks of getting in there? Do they need to have a trained attendant? So when this started as a medical service or a medical practice, they always had a trained attendant. Your public professional sports, so the Utah Jazz or our Utah hockey team, now that we have our Utah hockey team, right? They always have a trained attendant, somebody that's there that can watch and look for signs of cold shock. Remember the Cold Water Safety, National Cold Water Safety Association says that you can have serious health effects within a minute. You could die within a minute. So do we need to have a trained attendant? What does that trained attendant need to be trained in? CPR, first aid, AED, if that's something that you have at your facility, or is this something that should be lifeguarded? Most of these are in small wellness suites, so having a lifeguard stand over you as you get into cold plunge may be overkill, but at least having a trained attendant. Utah's code proposes that we have specific signage at a minimum. We also propose that we have some attendants there, but the signage says that we should warn people. We should say that adverse health outcomes may result from intense and sudden changes in exposure to temperature, which may include immediately impaired coordination, loss of control of breathing, muscle cramps, and a loss of consciousness. Another piece of the sign says, due to the risk of cold shock from total or partial immersion in cold water, any bather should consult a physician before using that cold plunge pool. We warn against elderly persons, pregnant women, persons using prescription medications such as beta blockers, and those suffering from heart disease, diabetes, or high blood pressure should consult a physician before using that cold plunge pool. Persons suffering with communicable disease transmissible by water shouldn't use a cold plunge pool. Same with any pool, right? Individuals under the influence of alcohol or other impairing chemical substances should not use a cold plunge pool. Bathers should not use the cold plunge pool alone. Again, that talks a little bit to that trained attendant. Should we require an attendant to be there? Bathers should not spend more than 10 minutes in the cold plunge pool in any one session. We also have a sign that limits the age. Children under the age of 14 are prohibited from bathing in a cold plunge pool, and that follows the Model Aquatic Health Code, that unsupervised children under the age of 14. And then running and engaging in unsafe activities or horseplay around the cold plunge pool is prohibited. We require in our proposed language in Utah, if the temperature is under 70 degrees and greater than 24 inches deep, meaning that means I can fully immerse my head and everything. We have an attendant certified in CPR, AED use, and first aid that can respond to a bather distress in 30 seconds, not 30 minutes. Ooh, 30 minutes would be way too long. 30 seconds. Are these something that we should put in regulation? Things that we can add or have in our regulation to make it safe? And that's where the discussion happens. With the growing popularity of cold plunge therapy, sharing this knowledge, training operators on some of the risks and hazards and water balance issues to ensure that their facilities are safe is essential. They need to know these risks that are happening potentially in their facility. The lack of regulation around these offerings make these conversations and these discussions that we're having like today even more important. The 20th and 21st centuries witnessed ice bath transformation from a niche practice to a global phenomenon. Dewey mentioned we've talked to people from Australia and from Canada, and they are dealing with some of these same issues with cold plunge pools. Driven by the scientific scrutiny and athletic endorsement, Michael Phelps has a cold plunge brand that he sells. It's carved into the space not only of the world of sports, but in broader cultural language and cultural landscape. However, as its popularity soared, so did the complexities around its efficacy and the potential risks. There's an ongoing debate fueled by ongoing research and evolving practices, ensuring that this journey of ice baths remains in flux. So we don't know what's going to happen, and we need to try to balance that public health with the risks and the complacency. Will we walk that fine line in public health, trying to make things safe and not scare people away from something that they could enjoy? So with that, as we look forward, the only thing that is certain is the quest to understand cold plunge and its impact on human health promises to be an adventure as we move through and make these discussions and formulate some of these regulations and ideas. And with that, are there any questions? I think I talked long and a lot.
Yep. So just as a reminder, folks, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Sarah, we have a couple of questions that have come in. And here's one with a follow-up.
Okay.
On water testing, is there any data that shows an advantage using photometers during the cold water sample, or to get a reliable result, is it necessary to warm the sample regardless of the testing method?
So I think that came from Ben. Ben, I'm not sure on the testing, but on the photometer testing, all the literature that I have found and that I've read says that you have to warm that sample regardless of what type of test kit you're using. And I think that's so that the reagents can make that reaction. The reaction takes a lot more time to take place. So even in a photometer or a more complex testing system, you still have to warm that up because the reaction is slower because of the cold water.
Right, thank you. And then here is another question is, do you have to adjust your ORP set points in cold plunge applications?
And the answer to that is I don't know. I would guess you would have to set them a little bit differently because it is a cold water. And I don't know if you want to have your ORP in a place where that is warmed. Again, that ORP is reading that cold water reaction. Those electrons don't move as quickly. So they can't sense those or get your ORP reading as quickly. So it may be something, and there's no studies on this, so I'm just guessing or making a scientific hypothesis, I guess. You probably should warm that chamber so that it could get an accurate read.
Yeah, very good questions. I have one, just as we wait on any additional questions to come into the chat. Sarah, my question is, just as a regulator, right? Because you've been out, you've looked at these things. Wonderful presentation, by the way.
Thanks.
You know, just as an inspector, right? What are some of the flags that have popped up with you during inspections?
It's that water balance. And I know it's not necessarily a public health issue, but it's what's dissolving out of my chillery unit. Because that water is so aggressive. What is it dissolving? Where is it finding that calcium or that balance? So what is it etching and eating in order to make sure that the water's balanced? And it's really, really hard to control, again, because the testing is harder because you have to let it warm up. And then again, we don't have very many studies that say, hey, this is what's happening, or we don't have NSF approved equipment. So we don't have people that have studied what's dissolving in our chiller units. So I think that's the hardest. It's hard enough for just a regular temperature pool to maintain that water balance. But when you add that cold water into it, it makes it a lot harder to balance that.
Right.
That's what I'm finding.
Have another question come in very quickly. And before, let me do a follow-up on the ORP question. We have a excellent chemist on hand in the meeting. And he said that ORP readings do vary with temperature. So we do have that clarification there.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. So couple of questions wrapped up in one, right? What disinfectant levels are you requiring in Utah, along with turnover rates? Do you have a specific filter media that you found is better for cold plunges? And how does this compare to other states?
Good question. So in Utah, we treat it as a spa pool. So they have to have a 30-minute turnover rate. So that water needs to be moving. That's typically not hard because these are small bodies of water. Disinfectant levels, we're requiring the 2 to 4 parts per million of chlorine is what we're typically requiring. I haven't had any issues with specific filter media. It could be sand. The one that I showed in the picture was a cartridge filter. We haven't had any issues with specific filter media. But that's what we're requiring. We're treating it as a spa pool. It's just a cold spa pool instead of the hot spa pool. Same with decking and entry and exits. It's all treated as that cold plunge pool or the spa pool regulations.
Right. I'll elaborate real quick on the one question brought to the states, right? So part of the work you've done is you've obviously researched what people are doing to figure this thing out, right? What have you found from other states as far as cold plunges?
They have them, but most of them are in professional or college athletes locker rooms. Most of them have an athletic trainer that's there with them, and that's part of the reason we have the idea of having an attendant there. So most of them are in professional places where they have an attendant there that knows some of the risks and some of the issues there, but they're not pool people. So they don't know about the water chemistry. They don't know about the aggressiveness of the water or the disinfection. So that's where I'm finding there's kind of a gap. And now it's moving more into the wellness center where I go to the gym and it's a wellness clinic. I have a hot sauna and then I get into my cold plunge, and it's becoming more of a public, easier to access without that attendant, without that knowledge there. So there's a little bit of a gap for the ones that are out there in other states, which are, like I said, typically with the college athletes, the professional athletes, they have those cold plunge pools, but they're being supervised and worked. And plus they're elite athletes. Like, these are not the Sarah Cheshires that maybe runs on the weekend that goes and decides to do a cold plunge. So these are people that may not have or they have attendants there that have people knowing about their heart issues, or if they have pre-existing conditions. So now we're moving into more of a mainstream where people are using these, and I don't know that the risks are really out there.
Okay, great. We have another question that's come in. Since the disinfection process has slowed due to cold water, do you or will you require UV on cold plunges?
Good question. Right now, we do not. I think it's probably a good idea to have some sort of secondary disinfection on there, whether that's UV or ozone, because the disinfection process is slowed, but it's not required right now in Utah, or not in our proposed language either. Good idea,
Great,
though.
thank you. Yeah, yeah, it really is. We'll give just another 30 seconds or so for any other questions to pop up.
Cool.
So a new question popped in. The cold plunge picture was a custom built unit. What about self-contained manufactured cold plunge units?
I love this question. This is a good question, and we get it all the time. Those are built specifically for residential use. They cannot withstand the rigors of commercial use. I have one of my facilities that has 120 people through that cold plunge every day. They just cannot circulate fast enough. They cannot chlorinate fast enough. They just cannot handle those demands of the commercial use. So they are in Utah. We had a bill that was passed that exempted if it's single bather, so one person at a time can get into that pool. It's under 180 gallons and the temperatures run less than 60 degrees. They are exempted from regulation. We had a legislator that completely exempted them from regulation at all, fitting into those custom built, self-contained, pre-manufactured units. So we can't touch those in Utah, but the ones we're looking at is where there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 bathers in there that are built. So I have, I don't know if I'm still sharing.
You are.
Okay, like this one this is a cold plunge pool. So this one being the coldest of the 3, and then the one at the bottom being the warmest of the 3. But this has a full-on circulation system. This is the circulation system for that with the ORP. We have chemical injector pumps and everything. So I'm really hesitant to endorse those self-contained units because they're just not manufactured for a commercial application. They just won't stand up to the wear and tear that you're putting when you're putting 80 to 120 people through those every day.
Great. Great, Sarah.
Mhm.
Last call for questions. Oh, here's one. Is there an exemption that includes suction entrapment prevention? So for example, on the exemption the regulator put in, does that also include exemption from VGB?
So, yeah, the legislator that did that, they are completely exempt from all rules. So there is no suction entrapment protection, nothing. They're just residential style pools. It exempts them completely. Now this public one does have the VGB, so any ones that fit in our rule, so they have to be over 180 degrees, more than one person at a time, and more than 60, or well, temperature I guess doesn't really matter, but these ones do have to meet the VGBA certification. The residential ones do not have any regulation whatsoever, which is terrifying, really.
Just a follow-up question, because you've seen obviously a lot of residential units in your work. Do you find that in general they're VGB compliant anyway, or do you find that they're not?
I do find that they are VGB compliant. It's very similar to a residential hot tub. It's just a residential cold tub. And yeah, I do find that they are generally VGB compliant, but I do find that most of your residents don't know about VGBA. That's part of the campaign when VGBA came out in 2008 was to get the residential pools in line as much as the commercial pools as well. So I believe they're mostly VGBA compliant, but I have not seen all of them.
Yeah.
And the other thing with that, I am going to say, Dewey, most people that have them in residences are not allowing little kids to use them. So I don't know that you'd have, I mean, the entrapment, most of the entrapment accidents we've had are for little kids, and these are 14 and older typically that are using these cold plunge pools, so older adults.
Sure. I just have one curious question for me as I look at this slide up with 3 cold plunges, and that's how does I've seen one. It's a facility that closed down a long time ago. These are just aren't that popular in my neck of the woods. How does the plaster hold up long term with the cold water?
Good question. And I don't know that we've had enough longevity. The one that I've had the longest has been 2 years in Utah. That's been operating the longest has been 2 years. And it's made of stainless steel. So it doesn't have the plaster per se. This one's been in operation for about a year and a half, probably is where we're at on this one. And I know that they have chemistry issues, that water balance issues. They're constantly fighting that water balance and meeting that saturation index, but I haven't seen how it holds up. But it hasn't been very long either. So I don't know.
I'll be curious to see that.
Yeah. These guys, so this particular facility in Utah has medical professionals there that walk you through a guided exercise, I guess. So they have nurses, ER docs, those types of things that walk you through. To the right of this picture, there's a sauna. So you come right out of the sauna, you take a bucket shower. I don't know how effective that is to rinse off some of that organic load. And then you go through this cold plunge phase, but they do have a guided tour, somebody that's with you the whole time, medical professional.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, folks, thank you very much, Sarah, for this presentation. This is a wealth of information that's very much needed as these things grow in popularity. So big hands off to Sarah. Thank you for your time and your expertise in presenting today. I want to take just a couple of minutes to promote a couple of things. One is the rest of our webinar series for this year. Very happy to have Tony Perry with Safe Slide Restoration coming in October to do a talk on slide maintenance. And also very excited to have Dr. Roy Vore coming in with our last webinar of the year in November to talk about biofilm in pools. So as a reminder, we can get CEUs now, right? So just a big promotion for that, and look out for those coming in the future. From a cold plunge standpoint, just as an FYI, CMAHC will be putting together a cold plunge ad hoc to dive into this and look at how the MAC can help be a leader in guidance for these things. So look for that coming in 2025 to start work there. We'll open for applications for that committee in the fall. So again, Sarah, thank you so much for this presentation, taking time out of your busy day. Thank you, everyone, for being here and listening and participating. So hope you have a great rest of the summer as we wind down towards Labor Day. And we'll look forward to seeing you on our next webinar on October 3rd at 11 a.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah.